God Emperor of Dune is just a crazy book, maybe the craziest one in the entire Dune series, and I'm excited to share with you the complete story of this chapter of Dune. Released in 1981, the story takes place 3,500 years after the events of Children of Dune. In the Dune universe, it spans from 13,727 AG to 13,728 AG. God Emperor of Dune was meant to be a middle ground after the first Dune trilogy, with Dune, Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, and a bridge to the second Dune trilogy, which would include Heretics of Dune, Chapter House Dune, and the never-released Dune 7, as Frank Herbert passed away before finishing it. But at least Brian Herbert continued the legacy and wrote his own Dune books. I might check them out someday. Who knows? Speaking of Brian Herbert, this edition of the book includes an introduction by him, where he talks about his father's professional life. Frank Herbert spent time as a journalist, a university lecturer, and even a librarian for the American government. According to Brian, Frank's mind was truly one of a kind, something he witnessed firsthand while watching his father write the Dune books. So, without further ado, let's go through the story of God Emperor of Dune. The first chapter of the novel opens with an account from the distant future. Hadi Benotto, who I believe to be a Bene Gesserit historian, is delivering a lecture to a group of scholars about the discovery of a place called Dar-es-Balat. This site, located on the planet Arrakis, formerly known as Arrakis, holds great significance. It contains the first ever node chamber and Ixian globe, both groundbreaking technologies. A node chamber or node room is a specialized structure with the ability to conceal anything inside it from the Oracle of Prescience. The other technology mentioned, the Ixian globe, isn't explained in great detail here. I couldn't find much information on it either in the Dune wiki or elsewhere on the internet. If anyone knows more about the Ixian globes, feel free to share in the comments. Benotto goes on to explain how the excavation of Dar-es-Balat led to the discovery of the Stolen Journals, a series of personal writings by none other than the God Emperor himself, Leto Atreides II. These journals offer insights into his thoughts, memories, and visions accumulated during his 3,500-year reign. Hadi then introduces a well-known poet, Herbert, who reads the introduction to Leto's journals. In case you haven't realized it, the name Herbert is an anagram for Bev Herbert, Frank Herbert's wife. Her husband's name, Herbert Farnak, is also an anagram, but I wonder for who. Anyway, the node chamber technology and the fact that Arrakis is now known as Arrakis are explored somewhat in this book, but they will be explained in greater detail in the sequel, Heretics of Dune. Throughout God Emperor of Dune, many chapters start with their quotes as excerpts from the Stolen Journals, providing us with glimpses into Leto's innermost thoughts. Later in the book, we'll revisit the Dar-es-Balat documents. Hadi Benotto mentions Siona's theft of Leto's cryptographs. The God Emperor is fully aware of her actions and her escape from his D-Wolves, but the stolen documents were merely copies. These were part of a larger plan to further test her, as surviving the Forbidden Forest was only the first step in her trial. Leto discusses the Ixians and their technology. He uses an Ixian device to write his journals, and relies on a royal floating couch, also crafted by the Ixians, for mobility. At this stage, he weighs 5 tons, as his transformation into a full sandworm nears completion. Leto mentions how the Atreides lineage traces back to Atreus of ancient Greece, and how the Golden Path has the objective to ensure the survival of humanity, maintained under his iron grip for over 3,000 years. His Sareer, the vast desert behind his citadel, is now the sole desert remaining on Arrakis and the only source of melange in the entire Imperium. With the sandworms extinct, Leto has ensured that no one can directly challenge his supremacy. We get to read a brief transcript of a conversation between Siona and her father, Moneo. Siona has a deep hatred for Leto and openly desires his destruction, while Moneo defends the God Emperor with blissful conviction. He explains that Leto is merely the Emperor, but the true monster is the worm, Shai Hulud. We see this perspective described by Moneo many times in this book. Toward the end of the video, I'll share my own reflections on this idea, but for now, let's move on. The book really begins with a group of rebels running through a place called the Forbidden Forest. The group was once much larger, but now only 3 people remained. They are fleeing from the citadel, from where Leto II reigns. Their original plan was to steal plans of the citadel, but they ended up finding cryptographs made of Redullian crystal and took those as well. Redullian crystal is a very thin material, first discovered by the Ixians. It is extremely durable and reflective, even capable of being used as a physical shield. Since the God Emperor banned Holtzman shields in his Imperium, Redullian crystal armor has grown much more popular. Back to the 3 characters, they are being hunted by D-wolves, animals created by Leto's breeding program to act as perfect guard dogs. The runner in the rear is Ulot. He's described as overweight but smart, which is why he was brought along. He was the one who identified the cryptographs and convinced the group to take them. In the end though, the D-wolves caught up to him and killed him. The middle runner is Kvoteg, described as being tall and strong. He was also caught by the D-wolves, but he managed to fight back and even killed 2 of them before being mauled. The last runner at the front is Siona. She's carrying the cryptographs and the plants. Her full name is Siona ibn Fuad al-Sayefa Atreides. The group started with 11 people, but in the end, only she survived. The others lost along the way were Alini, Ininag, Onemao, Hutye, Memar, Radi, Setur, and Oala. Siona eventually reaches the Idaho River and escapes from the wolves, as they refuse to step into the water, since it marks the edge of their territory. The chapter ends with Siona promising to destroy the God Emperor herself. Interestingly, this chapter mentions that men think Siona looks pretty when she runs, and that she is always sending sexual signals to men around her. Previously, Frank Herbert's writing in Dune was more serious, with a few moments of humor, but starting here, Frank has become the Joker. Once, Leto saw a descendant of Stilgar, a very old man, sitting on a bench in Arrakeen. Oblivious to the importance of his lineage, the old man passed away from natural causes shortly after that day. This moment shows how deeply time has eroded the significance of the Fremen heritage, and how human years are insignificant to the God Emperor Leto. The Museum Fremen are a group of charlatans who work in museums and occasionally attempt to invade the Sareer's desert in pursuit of an authentic Fremen experience. In truth, they know little about the real Fremen culture or its ancient customs, making them little more than clowns, ridiculed by everyone else. In this chapter, Leto awaits in his crypt, a network of catacomb labyrinths beneath his citadel. This sprawling maze, known only to the God Emperor himself, is a sanctuary where Leto stores small stashes of melange, creating the illusion that they are the last remnants of spice in the universe. Every Atreides who has died during Leto's reign has been buried somewhere within these crypts. Leto often occupies his time with the Bene Gesserit hand exercises, a habit that helps him focus while navigating his boundless memories or dealing with subordinates. In one such memory, he recalls a confrontation with a previous Duncan Idaho Ghola. During a heated discussion, that Duncan revealed a bomb he intended to use against Leto. The plan failed when the device detonated far too early, killing Idaho instead. The current Duncan Idaho Ghola, who has served Leto for over 60 years, enters the crypt carrying a folder of reports and a concealed lasgun intended to use to assassinate the God Emperor. Duncan tries to maintain composure, but Leto's heightened senses, a result of his metamorphosis, detect the adrenaline coursing through him. Leto smells Duncan's pheromones and senses the tension. Instead of acting immediately, Duncan presents a report on a newly emerged Alia code on Giedi Prime. After Duncan fails to understand what it means, Leto explains that the code is a Bene Gesserit fabrication, a ruse to facilitate their search for a secret Harkonnen melange stash on the planet. As Duncan continues with the other reports, Leto grows bored, waiting for him to act on his attempt. Lost in thought, he revisits memories of a figure named Jacob Broom, and reflects on how the price of melange has been going up in recent times. Leto also recalls a prior conversation with this very Idaho about governance, describing how each generation produces its share of extremists, rigid thinkers who see only black and white, good and evil. Leto, understanding their psychology intimately, has mastered the art of converting such individuals to join him and obey him. However, Idaho remains steadfast, viewing Siona as a threat who must not go unpunished. Duncan finally attempts to use the lasgun, but he hesitated because Leto used Paul's voice. Just long enough of hesitancy for Leto to surge from his couch with astonishing speed, crushing Duncan with his immense body. However, not before the lasgun severs one of Leto's vestigial useless legs. Duncan believed Leto's brain still resided within his diminished humanoid face. That's where he aimed his lasgun, but he was unaware that it had dispersed throughout his warm body. Moneo, ever aware of the toll each Duncan's death takes on Leto, reflects on how only 19 Duncans have died of natural causes during Leto's reign, with all the others meeting violent ends. Arriving via a silent Ixian elevator, Moneo finds Leto already issuing orders. Reward the guild whistleblower who revealed Duncan's lasgun, plot with extra melange. Send the lasgun as a gift to the Ixian embassy, the ones who gave Duncan the weapon, and instruct the fish speakers on Giedi Prime to locate the secret melange stash and neutralize the Bene Gesserit presence. Moneo informs Leto about the new anti-machine protests emerging across various planets, including Porella and the Dan star system. Leto drifts once more into his memories. Those ancestors, all of those memories are referred by him as the Horde. These internal voices ceaselessly debate and challenge him. Yet, he remains resolute, suppressing their influence. Leto laments the legacy of the Romans, blaming them for creating the concept of emperors, tsars, sultans, and other rulers. He declares that he will be the last one of his kind. There will be no new pharaohs after him. We are introduced to another major character in this book, Nayla. She's inside a hidden rebel base located in the city of Onn, once known by the ancient name Arrakeen. Nayla is a fish speaker, and she is described as being an ugly woman with a square face. Her body is extremely muscular, even amongst other fish speakers. These so-called fish speakers are Leto II's imperial army, composed only of women in every rank. Nayla was ordered by the God Emperor to obey every single order Siona gives her, and now she's writing a secret encrypted message, reporting the current status of her mission to the Emperor. After Nayla finished sending the report, she went on to talk to Siona and Topri. This one is another character described as having green eyes and being fat. Topri is the type of person who would betray the rebels for his own personal gain, and Nayla and Siona know it. Secretly, as we will come to know later, it is confirmed that Topri is an agent working for Moneo, Siona's father, just like how Nayla is a secret agent for the God Emperor. The three of them discuss what they discovered about Leto's cryptographs. Siona managed to recognize that Leto is quite emotional for a tyrant god. She intends on sending these journals to the Bene Gesserit, Ixians and Navigators Guild, for them to translate the works. Nayla tells Siona how she does everything she orders because, in her words, she promised to God that she would do all Siona wished. A rebel ceremony is held before a special meeting with a certain someone. Topri is the one doing the speech to the other rebels. He has a fake plastic crysknife, which he uses for the presentation. Siona recalls how they bought it off a museum Fremen. She remarks how deplorable and miserable those people are, the very bottom of society. The speech finishes and the Ixian ambassador is brought in. His name is Iyo Kobat. Secretly, Topri and Kobat are working together, something Siona knows, along with the fact that Topri is working for her father as well. Siona forces Kobat to admit that the Ixians are working with the guild to develop a new technology that could be used in intergalactic travel, as a way to replace the Emperor's melange. Siona calls it BS and says that they will never be able to accomplish such technology. Well, we'll discover later that Siona was wrong about this, but let's go back to the current events. Kobat admits that the God Emperor is aware of such project, and has ordered the Ixians to deliver him reports on its progress. He says that he is going to be replaced as the Ixian Ambassador, as punishment for delivering the last gun to the previous Duncan Ghola. Siona sends Kobat away with the encrypted documents they stole from the Citadel. Not only the Ixians received a copy, but also the Guild and the Sisterhood. This chapter ends with Siona expelling Topri out of the rebels, not killing him, since she knows all about his spying work. The next Duncan Idaho Ghola arrives in Onn. Over the past 3,500 years, the Tleilaxu always brought back Duncan's memories through a test where the Ghola is instructed to kill a young man that looks very similar to the original Paul Muad'Dib Atreides. Duncan now thinks back on how did they manage to get Paul's cells to make that Ghola of him, just for the test. The Tleilaxu leave Duncan to be interviewed by two fish speakers. Duncan cannot believe how different Arrakis looks, and how it is not called Dune anymore, because, well, the deserts are almost non-existent in the planet anymore. One of the fish speakers is called Luli, while the other is a muscular woman wearing an Ixian mask which hides her face and distorts her voice. We come to know later that this is Nayla. The fish speakers always interview the new Duncan Gholas to identify if they were tampered with in any way by the Tleilaxu. This is something that has happened twice in the past, and they've been severely punished for it. Two important things they say that every Duncan expresses his thoughts on is how the Tleilaxu are still considered as disgusting creatures with disgusting inventions, just as they were back in the times of Paul, while the other is that the Emperor prohibited the training of any new mentats in his Imperium, except some incarnations of Duncan himself. The fish speakers deem this Duncan to be clear. Luli herself will now give Duncan a bath. The next chapter details how orbital satellites are controlling the weather in Arrakis. They are used to protect the desert of the Sareer, but even with them, some rains still fall over it from time to time. Moneo once more comes to talk to the God Emperor. Leto remarks to himself how Moneo is 118 years old. Their plan, as it has happened with every other Atreides during Leto's reign, is for Siona to eventually overcome her rebelry and join Leto as his seneschal, the position which is currently held by Moneo. Siona is to procreate with Duncan. Idaho will be, at the same time, father of Moneo's grandchildren and his ancestor as well. Before that happens though, Siona has to go through a test just like Moneo did in the past. This chapter also has Leto II telling his Moneo that he is a predator, and proving the stock of humanity. The predator doesn't hate his prey. His prey has to adapt to survive the hunt. This is the golden path, the improvement of humanity, its survival, a way to teach humanity to think and plan ahead in the long term by itself, to become independent. Moneo leaves the presence of the God Emperor without his permission, but he knows that Leto will forgive him, for he has a lot of work to do. Eventually, Nayla visits Leto in his special reception room at the top of the Citadel's southern tower. She had to go up the longest set of stairs in the entire Citadel just to meet with him. Once she's there, Leto receives a direct report from Nayla about Siona and if she's ready to go through with the test. Leto and his horde reflect on how Nayla is the best, most loyal servant he has ever had. She is a fanatic religious follower of him. Leto despises his own religion, just like how Paul did during his reign. Leto has given a real crysknife to Nayla, that guaranteed her fanaticism in her faith even more. Nayla believes that everything Leto does is to test her faith in him, and he also dislikes that about her. Her report expresses how Topri is an awful spy, but Leto and Moneo had gotten to that conclusion by themselves already. It ends up that Siona is ready to go through with the test. Leto orders Nayla once more to do everything Siona asks her, and to bring Siona to the Citadel. Duncan is finally brought to talk with Leto II for the first time. He goes inside a dark room at first, before being revealed to the Lovecraftian horror Leto has become. Before going to the room, Duncan was kept in the company of Horus. Those fish speakers were very affectionated with him. In the Quran, Horus are virgins that are waiting for the faithful in paradise. At first, Leto uses Paul's voice to talk to Duncan. They remark on how the Paul the Tleilaxu used to awaken Duncan was probably a face dancer. But since it is left ambiguous, I disagree. I believe that was an empty goal of Paul without his memories. And I will have this theory of mine backed up by something we'll discover in Chapter House Dune. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Duncan mentions how he remembers getting killed by Harkonnen blades, when it was, in fact, Sardaukar who had killed him. Maybe Frank forgot what he wrote for that first book. This is not the only occasion something is stated in this book that is different to how it actually happened in the previous ones. Remember the Water of Death? Right, neither do I. Leto explains how he gradually changed his imperial army to have only women serving him. The first woman who joined his ranks had dreams filled with fish, and from them the name Fish Speakers originated. Duncan doesn't like how the military is composed only of women, but Leto assures him that women preserve lives much better than men. Not only that, but that sex is a great tool to control aggressive men. Mark these words, I tell you. The lights turn on and Duncan is speechless at first. The God Emperor speaks with the voices of Leto I, Jessica, Paul. All of their memories are still in there. This is the part where you must realize how scary it must be to be in the presence of the God Emperor, this eldritch beast. Duncan accepts to work as commander of the Fish Speakers, not for Leto II, but for Leto I and Paul. During Duncan's first day as commander, he gained an apartment at the northern tower of the Citadel with a beautiful view of the stars from the night sky. Moneo comes to visit him and gets acquainted with the new Idaho. Duncan quickly realizes that Moneo knows everything about him because of his past Gholas. Duncan comes to discover that Moneo is also an Atreides, a direct descendant from Ghanima and Harq al-Ada. Not only that, but Moneo is also a descendant of many past Duncan Gholas. Most of their conversation is about the female-only Imperial army. Moneo shares with Duncan everything Leto told him. Women mature sooner than men. Not only that, but they go through 9 months of growing a child inside them, an experience that ought to change one's perspective on life. Moneo says how male armies end up developing homosexual tendencies when its soldiers are of young age. Leto finds curious how, in history, it was always the older males that sent the younger ones to die in wars. Furthermore, a male-only army, when there's no external threat to their sovereign, always ended up fighting internally, against the people, either for their women or as oppressors. A female army would not only end unnecessary brutality, but keep the men under control. It is said many times that the fish speakers try to seduce Duncan and Moneo, and that they don't use contraceptives. Their conversation ends. Moneo thinks to himself about how this new Duncan has still a lot to learn. A sacred festival happens once a decade in Onn. Many noble houses and factions from the Imperium, such as the Guild, the Bene Gesserit and House Corino, which still somehow hasn't faded away, send their representatives to take part in this grandiose event, as it is their responsibility with the God Emperor to do as such. From the Sisterhood, a Speaker of Truth, Marcus Claire Louiseau, and another Reverend Mother, Tertus Eileen Antioch, arrive in Onn to participate in the God Emperor's festival. Their travel day was bad and they were unwelcomed by the fish speakers. They get a stay in an outback, poor quality guest house, chosen by the God Emperor himself. Upon immediately settling in, they receive intelligence from an Ixian named Otwi Yaki. He affirms that the Ixians have been compromised by the Tleilaxu face dancers, and that they plan on getting rid of the Emperor in that same day. It turns out Antioch is a Mentat, and they need to keep that a secret, otherwise she would be executed for it. This piece of intelligence is a great opportunity for the Sisterhood to make a move and get on Leto's good side. Leto and his court embark on their way to the Sacred City of Onn. Their journey follows a high road on top of the Sareer's mountain walls. He is accompanied by Moneo, his civilian court, and fish speaker guards. The guards are carrying lasguns, while Duncan only has a bladed weapon, since he has no experience with those lasguns. At a certain point, Leto stops his couch to look over the horizons. On one side, there is green forests and fields. Oceans can be seen in the distance, while on the other side, there is his artificial desert of the Sareer, the last piece of desert remaining on Arrakis. Duncan gets impatient due to their stop and comes to talk to Leto. They both are the only ones who remember back when all of this was a desert. Leto shows Duncan where the Tanzeraut once existed, now covered with fields and the ocean. He also tells Duncan about how Arakin's shield wall became part of the Sareer's wall, including the exact path of the road they're standing on right now. After recalling these old memories, the group starts moving once more by Leto's orders. From the Citadel to Onn, they will go by foot, and it will take some time for them to arrive there, back on the pilgrimage to Onn. It so happens that Leto gives another sermon to Moneo. The Bene Gesserit have tried for a long time to gain a permanent embassy in Arrakis, but Leto has denied that request, as he well knows that they will try to meddle in his religion. Leto says how, way back in the past, the Jesuits did the same as the Missionaria Protectora. Moneo doesn't understand what he means, for even in the most reliable historical archives present in the Imperium, there is nothing about any group called the Jesuits. That's how ancient they are to humanity. Moneo knows that Leto has spies everywhere. Not only that, but sometimes Moneo suspects that Leto can read minds. Once at the beginning of Moneo's service as Seneschal, Leto brought him, blindfolded, to a secret reserve of spice melange, Curiously, melange is described as being blue starting in God Emperor of Dune. Its color is never really described up until this point. At least I can't recall it being described as blue. Anyways, we know that the eyes of Ibad, the classic blue Fremen eyes, are that color, but I picture melange being orange or just the same color as cinnamon. This goes along with other descriptions of sandworms from the first books looking vastly different from their description present in Heretics of Dune, but we'll get to that once I talk about that book. Leto tells Moneo that he will one day return to the Sands. Arrakis will once more become Dune, a desert planet. In just 300 years, a new species of sand trout and sandworms will reign once more. These new Shai Hulud will be far more aggressive and destructive than the ones that existed 3,500 years ago. And they will all carry a little bit of Leto's memories in an unendless dream. Once Arrakis goes back to being a desert, Leto states that famine and disease will ravage over the Imperium. Only the strong will survive. The chapter ends with Leto angry at Moneo for mixing love and reproduction together. Leto says that his warm body cannot ever feel love, but in his memories, he knows what love really feels like. The next chapter starts with another quote from the journals. It describes a king called Assur-Nasir-Apli, the cruelest of kings. He killed his own father, conquered the regions of Urumia, Comagene, and Kabur. His son received tribute from Tyro, Sidon, Gebel, and Jehu, son of Omri. His conquests brought war to Israel, Damascus, Edom, Arpad, Babylon, and Amlias. Can anyone guess what planet all of this happened on? Most people alive today would have no idea. There is a Museum Fremen group right up ahead. They wish to call for a petition to the God Emperor. Leto Courts arrives over a bridge that passes over the Idaho River. This is the place where the Museum Fremen appear with their petition. Leto is quick to realize that those Museum Fremen are, in reality, face dancers. They swiftly take off their colored clothing and reveal a piece that looks just exactly like what Duncan is wearing. Not only that, but they shift their faces to look like Duncan. A battle starts. The fish speakers and the face dancers clash against each other. Leto changes his couch from tires to suspensors and uses it to crash into some of the face dancers, crushing and killing them in the process. Eventually, the battle is over. Leto looks around for his Duncan and finds him naked. Duncan ripped off his uniform so that the fish speakers could distinguish him from the face dancers. Around 50 face dancers took part in that attack. Leto explains to Moneo and Duncan how this is a diversion by the Tleilaxu. They intend on doing something else entirely. A new group of court officials and fish speakers is brought from the Citadel to replace the dead ones. This is so to make it seem to the Tleilaxu that their attack was a complete failure. Once they arrive in Onn. Later on, during the Tleilaxu audition, Leto will order his fish speakers to whip the Tleilaxu Embassador in public, so that the Imperium may witness, without explaining why he did that. Leto shows to Duncan how his couch was damaged by the attack. It turns out, some of the face dancers had lasguns. Duncan realizes how one of the shots should have landed on Leto, but the God Emperor lies that he is immune to lasguns. Leto mentions how shields have been banned from the Imperium. Moneo makes it seem as if he doesn't understand how shields work, so Duncan explains how if a lasgun laser lands on a shield, the result would be a nuclear explosion strong enough to kill both parties. Moneo just stares at him. Duncan now understands why shields were banned. And I find this scene so comical. Maybe I should insert a Friends laughing track here. Leto tells Duncan how all nuclear weapons on the Imperium were confiscated by his fish speakers, and concludes the conversation before they return to their pilgrimage. Moneo later tells Leto about a Bene Gesserit warning which arrived earlier that day. Intelligence on a Tleilaxu attack on His Majesty. Leto will repay them for their kind warning. And it so comes the time when Leto and his court arrives in Onn. The pilgrimage ends. We get a chapter which is basically a Bene Gesserit report written in the year 3508 of the God Emperor's reign. This report is titled as the Welbeck Archives and can be found amongst the archives in the planet Chapter House, the new Bene Gesserit Center of Operations. The report confirms how two sisters, Chinoe and Taswoko, described an event in the year 2116 of Leto's reign, when he burned 9 historians alive along with their work, for he claimed that they wrote presumptuous lies about history. It is said that during that time, Leto's Atreides senescal was called Iconivre. The report moves on to describe about the time Leto told the Bene Gesserit that their breeding program, now his, managed to give them Paul Muad'Dib, whom they lost, while it gave him Siona. The Sisterhood is still trying to understand what's so special about this girl. The report mentions about many recent personal changes within Leto's court, the replacement of the previous Duncan Idaho Ghola by a new one, and how the Choam and greater houses still existed. But the only greater houses that survived were those who had made heavy investments in the Choam. The Bene Gesserit project and investment in Giedi Prime was cancelled, for Leto sent his division of fish speakers to collect the melange stashed there and prohibit the Sisterhood from deepening its roots in that planet. Towards the end of the report, it is said that the Museum Fremen are the essential source of information to the Sisterhood about the situation in Arrakis. The Sisterhood has to continue bribing the Fremen in order for them to receive future information. Life had become static in the Imperium. Things didn't change anymore. The only exception was Ix. Leto's surveillance of Ix has also increased in recent times due to their new Guild Ixian project. The Lands Red essentially didn't exist anymore, only Leto's autocracy. Finally, the Welbeck Archives are closed with the signature of the Reverend Mothers Siaxa, Yitob, Mamulut, Eknekosk, and Akeli. But there was more hidden information, classified if you may. A historical record on Chinoe, which only came to light after her death. Chinoe once went on a pilgrimage to Onn with the God Emperor himself. Leto had told her words that should only be revealed after her death, and if she were to disobey him, his rage would befall the Sisterhood. Leto admitted how the Bene Gesserit idea of the abomination that he, Ganima, and Alia were was correct. Leto couldn't fight the horde of the other memories within himself. He succumbed to it. Leto knows that once he dies, he will be remembered as the tyrant who crushed the Imperium under himself. He will have journals for the future generations, as a way to share all of his knowledge so that humanity can be finally free once the Golden Path reaches its final stages. Leto only told all of this to Sister Chinoe because, in his words, she was a good listener. Chinoe would die shortly after that, while trying to become a Reverend Mother. It turns out she was incompatible with melange, and the experience of the spice agony ended her life. She never became a Reverend Mother. A bust of Chinoe would be made in her memory, and could now be found in Planet Chapter House. Duncan recalls some time ago when he had discussed the maps of Onn with Leto. Idaho noticed what Leto confirmed himself later on. The city of Onn was fully designed so that the entire city would have a proper view of the central area where Leto would appear during his festival. The whole idea was so that people could gather around to have a look of the God Emperor. And the central open area was 2 kilometers wide. The apartments of both the poor and the privileged all had an open view of the place. Even though the ritual only happened once every decade, most of the city was built just so everyone could take part in it. Onn also had the embassies of the Imperium and the fish speaker schools. Those made up less than 1% of the whole city. Not only all of that, but there was also a giant underground complex right below the city, made just for Leto, his fish speakers, and his court. Once they arrived at the center of Onn, they descended into this underground complex with a platform, a gigantic Ixian elevator. Duncan heard the fish speakers chanting the word Siaynoq. It is explained to him as a word reserved only for the woman of Leto's army. The word meant to remember something sincere that was said. Later in the book, Duncan comes to discover that there is also a gigantic, unmapped labyrinth under Onn as well. One of its rooms has 1 kilometer in diameter and is filled with fish speakers from all across the Imperium. Duncan and Leto are on special platforms so that every fish speaker can see them. Idaho finally realizes why Leto has an army of only women. Hundreds of thousands of fanatics that would do anything for their god, Leto, without any trace of fear. A far more fervorous army than that of Muad'Dib. An army that could do anything and could destroy any group or planet that may rise against the god emperor. Leto shows to the crowd Muad'Dib's own crysknife, and then he gives them a speech. Some women with babies come to have their children to be blessed by Leto's presence. A little wafer saturated with melange is given to every single fish speaker there. Leto and Idaho also receive one themselves. These women are the strongest power any emperor could ever have control over. Nobody has any chance to win against Leto, ever, for he has the perfect army to control an entire galaxy. Idaho thinks back to his conversation with Leto and how wrong he was to reject the idea of a female army. Leto had told him that a male army battles for power, while a female army battles for their leader. If there is no enemy to be fought, a male army would create one, whether it be within its own nation or not. Both male and female armies commit sexual assaults during times of war and peace. The difference is that the female one can tame and domesticate the man under their power, something the male army cannot. Boys born in this Imperium with fish speaker authority will live a life dominated by the girls. The new Ixian Embassador is a woman called Noree. She is the nephew of someone known as Malky, who is said to have been once the Ixian Ambassador himself, and not only that, but also to have become quite acquainted and friendly with the God Emperor. When Hui is introduced, it is said that she was accepted as the ambassador at the Ixian Congress in a place called the Grand Palais. It is also mentioned that the God Emperor once killed a group of historians for spreading lies about history. A decision which Hui defended in front of the Congress. During the Great Festival of Onn, Noree came to the presence of the God Emperor for the first time. Hui was a brunette with dark skin, very similar yet very different to her uncle Malky. She was a calm person with gracious movements, whereas her uncle was agitated and the antithesis of gracious. During their talk, Leto discovers how she was made to enchant him. Hui had indeed received Bene Gesserit training. She is a very empathetic woman, who even feels for Leto's sacrifice for humanity. He could never feel the love of a woman. He no longer had the means to be intimate with one, due to his sacrifice. It is mentioned how the Ixians had tried to kill Leto twice with lasguns. One of those occasions was with Kobat, the previous ambassador, while the other happened a long time ago, and in that case, Leto himself crushed the ambassador with his body and killed him. Leto knows all about the secret Ixian nucleus, a special place where their most innovative inventions come from. Leto does have Ixian ancestors who are aware of such a secret place. Leto knows that the Ixians have recently built a secret colony just outside the Imperium. Were they testing his prescient powers? It is stated that Leto can have visions of the Guild Navigators now. They were no longer a barrier against the Oracle. Now this isn't explained, but I have two theories. Either Leto has prescience like nobody else, that being why he can see other prescient people too, or maybe it is because the Navigators, with their reduced diet of spice melange under the God Emperor, become much more visible due to that lack of their essential product. Either case, this is never really confirmed. Leto starts asking Hui about her life and her childhood. She doesn't have any memory of her parents, nor had any childhood friends. The only people she met when young were all tutors and teachers that were preparing her for great things, as Uncle Malky once told her. Hui is unsure what age she even is, but she believes to be 26 years old. She tried searching for a document on her birth among Ixian archives, but couldn't find any. Leto reveals to her, through his deductions with information given by his prescience, how he believes that she was born inside a new Ixian machine. This machine is probably the first Ixian no chamber during its early stages. In the next two Dune books, this technology would be further developed and it will become much more common around the universe. Basically, no chambers are structures that act as blind spots for the Oracle of Prescience. Neither them nor anyone inside them can see or be seen by someone with prescience on the other side. Leto ends their conversation by sending Hui to warn the Ixians that they will be punished if they continue testing the Emperor. Not only that, but that Leto wants Hui to become the permanent Ixian Ambassador. He won't accept anybody else in her position. Later, Duro Nunepi, the Tleilaxu Ambassador, comes to his audience with the God Emperor. Leto lies that the Tleilaxu have been spreading repulsive rumors about the God Emperor's sexual habits, and for this, he punishes the Ambassador by ordering his fish speakers to whip him in front of all of Onn. Leto concludes by deciding that the Tleilaxu won't receive any spice melange for the next decade. As his audience's day come to an end, the Bene Gesserit finally get their turn as the last ones to audition. Before they come in, Moneo reports that Duncan has met Hui and became infatuated with her. Leto orders that Idaho is prohibited from talking or getting close to Hui, because she is not for him. Antiak and Luisiao arrive in His Majesty's presence. Leto thinks to himself about how the Bene Gesserit have changed in the past decade. They started employing replacement rituals due to the lack of spice melange. The Sisterhood wishes to have a permanent alliance with the God Emperor. They fear the Ixians, and the possibility that they may create an artificial intelligence similar to that of the Butlerian Jihad. The Ixians had formed an alliance with the Tleilax and Navigators Guild and asked the Bene Gesserit to join them as well. Leto realizes how the Bene Gesserit are planning something else, so he reveals about how his brain has evolved to a network of nerves throughout his entire body. As the conversation goes, Leto gets it that Luisiao is carrying spice essence, and wants to test how the God Emperor will react if he gets in contact with that essence. Leto talks about deodorants and perfumes, and by what he says, apparently, in Dune nobody uses those, like, since the times of Muad'Dib. Imagine how much people must stink in this universe. Luisiao and Antiak realize that Leto has seen through their real intentions, and they give him the glass with the spice essence. Duncan arrives after his inspection and reports to Leto about many attacks that started around Onn. The God Emperor tells him about every single location the attackers are at, their forces, and when they will act. Idaho is to spread the fish speaker forces accordingly to get rid of all these attacks. The Reverend Mothers realize that the reason Leto has Idaho always as his commander is because Idaho is loyal. He always follows the orders of an Atreides. I wonder if this moment is the one which inspired them to do the Gamu project we'll come to see in Heretics of Dune. After the meeting with the Sisterhood is over, Leto thinks about how much he wishes to go back to his human form so he can enjoy his time with Noree. That single woman might be the greatest danger his golden path ever had. With Hui, his enemies have finally discovered his weakness. Leto tries to occupy himself with the memories of the past. He remembers the music of Mozart, Bach, and Licalo. He thinks back to the Napoleon family. Leto recalls the life of Norma Senva, the woman who designed the spaceships for the Navigators Guild. He remembers crossing back and forth through the desert of the Sahara, spreading Islam. None of those thoughts work though. Leto still wants to call Noree, but he can't, so he decides to just cry in silence. Idaho finally meets Siona. He thinks back when he dealt with the Corino heir while in Onn, under Leto's orders. That man was fat and insignificant, and was easily killed off by the fish speakers. How a mighty family which once ruled the Imperium has decayed to the point of being this weak and irrelevant. A fish speaker called Enmer is taking Idaho and Siona to somewhere safe. They are not to return to Onn again. Their ornithopter passes by many villages. Idaho sees many horses everywhere. Those are six-legged horses. All of this greenery makes it seem that Arrakis has never been a harsh desert planet, when Duncan knows very well how it once looked like. It turns out most of the Imperium has been reduced to small villages such as these. Time has stood still. Nothing has changed in a long time. By seeing Siona, Duncan got reminded of his hatred of the Harkonnen who once enslaved him. Did Siona feel the same way for the God Emperor? The ornithopter passes by a special place, and Siona asks Idaho to order Enmer to take them there. He does exactly that, and they land in a village called Goigoa. Siona tells Idaho that this place was once known as Shulach in the past. Idaho likes the place. It reminds him of Caledem, such a peaceful village. Siona talks him out for a walk. She tells him that Leto has had a few wives throughout his reign, but most of that happened while he still had a human form. His first wife had come from this village. This makes me believe that, in the end, Leto did marry Sabiha. Isn't that nice? She got to be with the man she loved. Duncan and Siona sit by a fountain and stay there a while, until a boy comes up to Idaho and stares at him, before running away. Siona tells Duncan that she brought him here because the wife of the previous Ghola was still living in Goigoa. Besides that little boy, the Ghola had an older son and daughter with a fish speaker called Irti. Idaho decides to follow the streets the boy ran up, and he eventually reaches what had been the home of his past Ghola. There, he catches a look at his wife. Irti looked exactly like Jessica. After a while, his older son comes to confront him. He asks Duncan to never come back to Goigoa again, for he causes Irti far too much pain. Siona felt bad after doing this to the new Duncan. They would eventually split up and she would be brought to the Citadel. Duncan was unexpectedly recalled back to Onn. Noree received a fish speaker and a reverend mother called Antiak at the Ixian embassy. The fish speaker told her that Leto wanted to call Hui to his presence, so she'll escort Hui there. After they leave the embassy, Antiak confirms something to the fish speaker, but what it is about is left ambiguous. Obviously, as we will come to know, Antiak came together because the Bene Gesserit can easily identify face dancers, and it so happens that Hui was the only person there at the embassy that wasn't a face dancer. Huey is left on a somewhat darkened room. Leto is already there and greets her. Huey thinks to herself how much Leto's state saddens her, but also how much she is attracted to Duncan. If only Leto had Duncan's body, it would be the perfect man for her. Leto tells Huey that her embassy was invaded by Tleilaxu face dancers, and that she was the only one left alive from the Ixians, as Antiak confirmed previously. Huey had noticed how her assistant, Otwi Yaki, was acting extremely weird recently. In Leto and Huey's conversation, she mentions how she read Noah Arkwright. Apparently, this is a work of literature written by Leto himself and released for the Imperium. To write it, Leto impersonated one of his ancestors, so he wasn't really the author responsible for creating that work. Huey tells Leto about how the Ixians are interested in his religion. They want to understand it so they could potentially do something similar. Leto reveals a few things to Huey during this chapter. He tells her about how he isn't really a god, and how once he dies and planet Dune comes back, his memory will be divided into every single sandtrout and sandworm there. Noree realizes that Leto didn't transform himself for power nor to become the Emperor. He instead did it to save humanity. Leto tells her that she is not ready yet, but that he'll share all of that with her later. To end this meeting, Leto reveals how he wants Huey to marry him, but he admits that there is no organ left in his body, so if she wants to have children, she'll need to do it with someone else. Leto asks for her to let him choose who. In the following chapter, Duncan comes to talk to Leto in the same room that Huey had previously done so. Duncan is very bothered by the Siaynoq Ritual he had just taken part in. He complained to Leto that the guards that had brought him wanted to make him stop and do an orgy, which he obviously declined. Duncan says that Leto's fish speakers are a police force, but Leto denies it, saying that police forces inevitably become corrupt, and that laws and prisons are only useful to make judges and lawmen gain the illusion of importance in society. For that reason, Leto's punishments are immediate and, in most cases, are death sentences. There is not even a single prison planet in all of Leto's Imperium. Not even a single normal prison. Duncan doesn't understand Leto's government. He also dislikes how Siona is currently working with the rebels and how Moneo was once a rebel in the past as well. Leto tells him that Idaho was himself a rebel once, who helped Paul Atreides overthrow the Corrinos. Leto orders Duncan to stay away from Noree before their meeting is over. And in the next chapter, Moneo meets Leto in the same room as Idaho and Huey had previously done so. Moneo had spent a lot of time with Reverend Mother Antiak and is now sure that she is a Mentat. Antiak and Moneo discover together that the Tleilaxu gave special equipment to the Ixians, who in turn use some sort of closed machine which supposedly blocks the power of the Oracle, and store that special equipment inside it. It is said that Malky entered the machine and left it with a baby, and all of this had happened around 26 years ago. Supposedly, the equipment had the goal of creating neither a Ghola nor a clone, but to alter someone's genetics and make a new person. Noree was the baby created inside that strange machine. She is the antithesis of Malky. Moneo said he would send Huey away back to Ix, but Leto orders him to not interfere. Moneo should instead bring Huey to Leto's presence once more, and also not to confiscate a special delivery by the guild that was sent with Siona as its receiver. That package had the translations of Leto's journals. In this chapter, it is revealed that Moneo completely avoids the melange, for he is scared to have the same visions and memories that Leto has. It is also revealed that the Orange Catholic Bible has a different version of Adam and Eve. It wasn't Eve who ate the forbidden fruit and gave it to her husband. Instead, it was Adam who ate it and then blamed his wife for not preventing him from doing so. This shows to men's inevitable tendency to go down aggressive paths in their lives. The next chapter, Noree comes back to Leto's presence. She has made her decision. She will no longer work for the Ixians. Instead, she will only obey Leto. The God Emperor tells her that Antioch will help them discover where Hui really came from and how she was born. Leto can't help himself but think about how Hui is the perfect woman to ever exist. Leto is fully honest with her. He chose this path and he knows that he will end up dead. His seeds bringing a new cycle for humanity. Noree knows that Leto's peace is not a real peace. There is still violence. He doesn't permit space travels without his supervision or approval. But he says that once he's dead, after the period of chaos that will follow, humanity will finally become free. Between his death and the return of the sandworms, it will be complete chaos. Hui Noree finally understands how the fish speakers feel. Something neither Duncan nor Moneo would ever be able to understand. Leto tells her that men of principles are the strongest and those who are willing to die for their beliefs. Men with principles are decisive, and they always end up making the best administrators, the best leaders. His rebels always had principles, and they always ended up serving him, like Moneo did. Leto finally asks Hui Noree to marry him. She accepts. After that, Leto sends her to talk to Antioch. Some time passes and an unexpected attack commences in Onn. Leto is worried about Hui. His oracle had not foreseen this sudden attack. The Tleilaxu are fighting with a rebel group called the Contact Tleilaxu Element, and most of the explosions and fights are happening all around the Ixian embassy. Leto orders his fish speakers to kill all Tleilaxu face dancers and the rebels. Duncan and Siona were, by now, safe at the citadel. The God Emperor comes out to the city and uses both his couch and the warm body to kill many of the dancers and the rebels. Their blood covers him, and since blood is close to actual water, his body ends up burning and hurting because of the contact. He's too humid. The las guns the attackers use are unable to harm Leto. And after the fight is over, Leto gets dry and warms himself inside a special chamber with sand in his private room under Onn. Q El Emo is the name of the fish speaker guard that has assured Hui Noree's safety. Leto promotes her to Sub-Bashar and sends a message to Antioch, who's also safe. But her mission is now extended to locate Malky and share his location with his fish speakers stationed in Ix. Leto knows Malky is behind the sudden attack. He orchestrated everything from his no chamber. He was dangerous and could not be permitted to live. The God Emperor then sends another message for Nayla to reveal her fish speaker occupation to Siona, but to confirm how she is still loyal to her. Elio, the Bashar of the fish speaker troops, which witnessed their god fighting, comes in to give him a report. Leto decides to call her by her other name, Nishai. The town square he had fought on was already being repaired, just like the rest of the destruction caused during the battle. Leto orders Nishai to spread the information that the Tleilaxu were behind the attack. No rebel from the Contact Tleilaxu element were left alive. All were executed by fish speakers. Nishai leaves, but not before revealing that she was from Seleucia Secundus and a distant relative of the Corinos. After she's gone, Hui Noree comes to Leto. She is safe, but with a small wound. Leto discovers that she didn't see him fight. Then he reveals to her how much he loves her. The God Emperor tells Hui that once he's dead, people must remember him as Shaitan, which means Satan, the tyrant which oppressed humanity for 3,000 years. Leto orders Hui to never interfere with Siona. He tells her about how Siona has the potential to become both a saint and a great leader. It all depends on whether she wants to follow that path. To end their conversation, Leto confirms to Hui that he will announce their marriage to the Imperium. It will undermine his position as god, but it will all work in the end. At one point, Antioch writes a message back to Planet's chapter house. Hui Noree had come up to her, talking about the upcoming marriage she would have with the God Emperor. Hui tells her about how the God Emperor trusts Entiak, the Ixian director of extra-federative affairs, Enpri, once shared with Hui the theory that Leto accepts threats up to a certain amount. Hui believes this theory to be correct. Finally, she describes her birthplace to the Reverend Mother and puts Entiak's mented abilities to work. She is to be sent to Ix and investigated, in person, to discover what is this anti-prescience machine the God Emperor mentioned. Eventually comes the day Leto announces his marriage to Hui in the middle of Onn, for everyone to hear. He makes this announcement after a little show by the surviving face dancers, who were forced to go along with such display. Moneo met Entiak before she left Arrakis and now came back to Onn to meet Leto. He is enraged by this marriage. This announcement and what it represents would turn the God Emperor into the focus of controversy in the entire Imperium. Those rumors on his sexual habits would spread even more. Leto admits to Moneo that he chose to marry Hui because his emotions took the better of him. His memories of love weren't enough. Duncan comes to meet the God Emperor, but is held outside in the reception room. Leto and Moneo ignore him as for now, but their conversation can be heard by Duncan and the fish guards outside. Moneo comes to accept the marriage, and asks Leto for how they should prepare for the ceremony. The God Emperor wants the marriage to be held in a village called Tabur, on the edge of the Sareer. Their marriage will be a classic Fremen ceremony, and Hui is to wear an authentic steel suit and Fremen wedding gown. To be invited, only a fish speaker guard and the aristocracy, which is composed of the remaining Atreides, servants, and the court from the citadel. Moneo has started to prepare all these things, and Leto thinks to himself about how Moneo had the potential, but he wasted his opportunity. Now it is up to Siona, who will go through with her test soon. Finally, Idaho comes into the room after being ignored. He starts a discussion with Leto, and the God Emperor is impressed by how this Duncan is acting differently from most of the previous Gholas. Idaho was starting to rebel against Leto much earlier than any of the previous Gholas ever did. Idaho says that he doesn't belong here. He questions why Leto wants him and keeps reviving him. He claims that Leto has committed crimes against him, that Leto shouldn't have brought so many Gholas back to life against their will. Idaho talks about the charm in living, the magic of being alive. He's lacking that charm. He doesn't feel alive as a Ghola, and is sure that none of his previous incarnations ever felt alive. Idaho heard of how Leto supposedly fought at the square in front of the Ixian embassy, and it is hard for him to believe that Leto did something like that with this warm body. Previously, Idaho had met Nayla, and he tells Leto about how much she reminds him of Brute Rabban. Maybe it was deliberate, who knows? Probably Brute Rabban is an ancestor of Nayla. Leto thinks to himself about how privilege leads to arrogance. Arrogance leads to injustice, and injustice leads to ruin. Leto tells Duncan that there is no frontier. Past Duncans try to escape the Imperium, but none ever managed to get away from Leto's grasp. Idaho decides to go back to the Citadel, but Leto prohibits him from ever getting close to Noree ever again. Idaho wants to meet her and hates how Leto is going to marry her. Quite some time passes, and Leto complains to Moneo about how Duncan has been disobeying him and trying to see Noree. Moneo is afraid that Leto might try to kill him, so he dares to question the God Emperor if it is possible for His Majesty to reproduce with Noree. Leto tells Moneo to never ask something like this ever again, and orders Moneo to deal with both Duncan and Noree. Moneo leaves with his life. Not only the God Emperor has become erratical and dangerous, but the fish speakers, with the news of the marriage, have also become extremely dangerous and quite aggressive. Idaho is eating in the public dining area of the Citadel. Moneo sits with him and tells about Leto's orders for him to stay away from Hui, for she is not meant for Idaho. Duncan openly criticizes the God Emperor, with many fish speakers overhearing their conversation, thus making Moneo mad with him. Idaho goes back to his apartment and finds Hui waiting for him there. She is there to talk about their situation, but the two end up making love instead. They will never meet like this ever again, and Leto will know what they did, for Hui will tell him about it. Moneo later meets the God Emperor and gives him a report on how the next Duncan Idaho Ghola will only be ready in 2 years. As the Tleilaxos said, they encountered a few problems with his production. Moneo shares how Idaho started questioning the fish speakers about their background history, where they came from, who their parents were. Leto is very angry, and Moneo fears that he might get killed by the God Emperor this day. Moneo is blinded by his religion and tells Leto that he cannot believe the God Emperor would do something vile. Leto clashes back, saying that religions always create short-sighted and close-minded people, just like how Moneo ended up. Moneo was meant to reproduce with Hui, but now it is far too late. Moneo lost his opportunity. Leto jumps out of his couch and lands centimeters away from Moneo, making him run away scared for his life. Before leaving the crypt, Leto orders Moneo to bring Siona the next day, for that was when her test would begin. Some time passes. Idaho is searching for Moneo everywhere within the citadel. Duncan finally finds Moneo in the fish speaker dormitories. He tells the Seneschal that he wants to see Leto, but he can't find him anywhere. Moneo answers that Leto is out testing Siona, and he admits that his daughter could die and never come back. Idaho was infuriated, for he had witnessed many young fish speakers taking action in passionate kisses and sex in those dormitories. Moneo gets angry at Idaho for the first time and calls him a crying baby, saying that he should grow up. Idaho was arrogant and selfish. Moneo admits that he understands the pain the God Emperor goes through and the sacrifice he made. He says that Idaho is only a primitive human who cannot pay the simple sacrifice the God Emperor asks him to. Idaho tries to attack Moneo but is swiftly brought to the ground without much effort. Duncan realizes that even against Moneo, a simple Seneschal, he has no chance of winning a fight. Moneo, Siona, and the fish speakers were the results of hundreds of generations of selected breeding. The next chapter starts with a quote by Leto. He remembers an old memory of one of his ancestors making a cave drawing. Leto ponders why doesn't other people see what's beyond the cave. Seeing those shadows on the walls, unable to understand that there's a whole world out there, too blind to see the truth. Idaho is mad while trapped within his apartment. He has finally realized that the only useful thing out of him is his sperm. Moneo sends a fish speaker to call Duncan to his office, noting that Hui is also invited to go there. Idaho notes how beautiful the fish speaker looks and asks her if she wants him to get her pregnant, but later he decides not to go along with that. Idaho accepts to visit Moneo in his office, and when there, the Seneschal admits that he was wrong for taking Idaho down earlier that day. Moneo finally admits to Idaho that he was once a rebel who despised Leto the same way foolish Siona and Idaho now do. He went through the test before becoming Leto's Seneschal. Idaho compares Leto to Vladimir Harkonnen, saying that he was much worse than that fat baron. Moneo and Hui instead understand Leto's pain and the reason he went through such transformation. While they can cry, Leto cannot. It is believed that long ago, Leto built an underground secret tunnel from his citadel to the central tower in the middle of the Sareer. Nobody else is sure whether it really exists or not. Only the God Emperor does. Leto thinks to himself about this is his favorite place in the entire Imperium. The only place he feels at home. Leto likes to submerge himself and to dig through the sand like a real sandworm of old. The dry and hot sand is the most pleasing thing to him. Siona eventually meets up with the God Emperor in his tower in the middle of the Sareer. She was brought there by an ornithopter in order to talk to Leto. It is nighttime when Siona finally arrives, and Leto talks to her while overlooking the Sareer. Siona is direct and to the point. Leto remarks how this is a special Atreides characteristic he intended to maintain through his generations of Atreides breeding. Leto sees how, if Siona were to have the eyes of Ibad, she would look just exactly like Ganima. During their conversation, Siona asks a lot of questions on how it feels to be like Leto. She almost feels sympathy for his suffering. Leto tells Siona that she could also transform herself like he did, if only there were enough sand-shrouds for her to do so. During their conversation, Siona seems to think that love is only sex. She questions why Leto will marry her with Noree if he cannot take part in a sexual act. But Leto answers that he wants to marry Hui because she is his pair, the only one out there who truly understands him in this whole universe. Leto admits that he loves Moneo and loved all the past Atreides that came and went. This was his biggest weakness, love, now exposed to Siona. Their interaction ends. Leto concludes that Siona is dangerously ignorant, but she's ready to go through with the test. She will be brought back to the Citadel, and the test will start from there. Siona meets the God Emperor at the very edge of the desert of the Sareer. She's dressed with a real steel suit and was given dry Fremen food for her journey. Leto thinks about how the Fremen genes are always attracted to the desert. His Sareer was the Bar Bela Ma, the ocean without water. Leto asks Siona to climb up on his back, just like how old Fremen used to ride sandworms in Arrakis. Then they travel deep into the desert, toward the very middle of the Sareer. Siona asks Leto if he has a personal religion outside of the one he imposed over the Imperium. He answers in Latin, and Siona doesn't understand him, since Latin has been a long-forgotten language by now. Once they're at the center of the Sareer, Siona sees only deserts and sand dunes toward every single direction. There, Leto reveals to her what her test is. Siona is to survive like a real Fremen and reach the opposite side of the Sareer from the Citadel. During this chapter, Leto thinks to himself about how Coriolis storms have long ceased to occur in Arrakis, but that Giblis, a sort of small sandstorm, still happen from time to time. Leto also notes how the Sareer only exists because of his Ixian satellites, which control the weather from the exosphere, impeding rains and other masses of cold air from covering the desert and turning it green. Even with that, it so occurs that sometimes it rains by accident in the desert, something unavoidable. While they journey through the desert, Leto tells Siona many stories. Some museum Fremen risk going out into the Sareer from time to time. They inevitably end up dying. For that reason, it was common for vultures to eat their carcass around the desert, since there was no sandworm to eat those remains from the surface. Leto knows that there's still a burning passion within Siona, and then she decides to take a random direction to walk, and it ends up she's going toward the right direction. While walking, when day was turning into night, Siona looks up at the beautiful stars of the sky. Leto tells her how the Fremen had no belongings, for they were a free people. Siona is thirsty because she's not wearing the facial mask of the steel suit, and this could bring upon her death. Once the night fully takes over the Sareer, Siona starts freezing. Leto realizes how Siona shows many signs that she could die there and fail her test. He shares with her the warmth of his worm rings while she's asleep. On their third day in the desert, Leto finally reminds Siona to wear the steel suit mask. By now, she had lost too much water. Siona was experiencing the patie, the thirst before death, the teda reagrimi, the agony which opens the mind. Siona starts to question whether Leto really is a tyrant. He admits to her that, were it not for his golden path, for his iron fist upon the Imperium, humanity would have gone extinct already. Leto points out how he never mentioned Siona in any of his many journals. He expresses the dangers of doing things without thinking, like how Siona never thought about wearing her steel-suit mask, something aggravated by technology. Ixian technology. Siona was different from the rest of people because she was independent. Siona's desert rations had all been filled with melange. She was now starting to have prescient visions. What follows is the most disgusting Dune scene I've ever read. Leto's face edges can expel water if massaged gently. Siona does that and licks the melange-saturated water out of him. After that, she lays in between Leto's rings once more and has many visions of the future and all of her ancestors. After many hours, Siona finally wakes up and understands the Golden Path. She can feel the pain Leto has gone through. She understands how Leto has the power of the Oracle, but has never been able to see Siona in any of his visions. Only her presence, even though Siona wasn't prescient herself. This genetic trait is one of the goals of the Golden Path. Leto has a vision of Antioch screaming in pain and of fish speakers fighting in Ix. Something had just happened there while he and Siona were in the Sareer. Suddenly, rain falls from the sky. Siona drank the falling water, then she realized what had happened to Leto. He was in extreme pain, his warm body trying to tear itself apart. Blue smoke comes out of Leto's body from every part of him where the water had touched. Siona finally discovers how Leto can be destroyed. Water is the only thing that can damage him. Not a bomb, not a lasgun, nor a blade, but water. Nayla delivers the news of Siona's survival to Moneo. He, in turn, confirms to Nayla that she is obligated to be present in Leto's marriage, and that she is the only one allowed to carry a lasgun during such event. After Nayla leaves, Moneo asks the fish speaker guard at his door to leave it open and call Idaho. That guard later starts playing a lute outside, and stops only once Duncan arrives. Idaho comes inside the room and talks to Moneo. Duncan admits that he's been thinking like a Fremen in most recent times. Moneo shares with Idaho how his task was to survive a labyrinth underneath the citadel with a bag of food and melange essence. Idaho knows that Siona survived her test and has already arrived at the citadel. Moneo shares how, after he became Senescal, Leto sent him to explore vast oceans for a time. None of his ancestor Senescals ever learned to trust the God Emperor. Then Siona comes in. She has become the commander of the fish speakers, but currently only has the authority to order Nayla. With both Idaho and Siona in his office, Moneo shares his decision to leave both of them out of Leto's marriage. They're to be sent to the village of Tuono and spend time there instead. Moneo tells Duncan that this is the first time he has ever tried to keep Idaho alive, and so he has to trust him. Duncan accepts to stay at Tuono with Siona. Leto was surprised by Moneo's independent decision to send Siona and Duncan to Tuono without asking him. He approves of that decision. The marriage is almost ready, just a few things are needed for it to be held. Moneo admits to Leto that he fears Siona, but doesn't know why. Leto notes how Hui comprehends the Siaynoq Ritual better than any of his fish speakers, something that bothers them, and Hui knows it. At the end, Leto decides to change the marriage from happening in Tabur to Tuono. The day arrives when Malky is being brought to the presence of the God Emperor. Captured by his fish speakers and transported by the Navigators Guild, Leto and Moneo are waiting at the top of the biggest tower of the citadel. It is a rainy night. Leto admits to Moneo that his past memories and lives have never given him any peace, only suffering. Antioch was loyal to them. She died in Ix. but thanks to her, Malky was captured. Moneo shares to Leto about Duncan's actions in Tuono. He was teaching the museum Fremen there about authentic Fremen customs and culture. Malky finally arrived to their presence. He is far too wounded and on the brink of dying. While he and Leto talk to each other on the same heights, Moneo feels like a little child compared to them. The Ixians under Malky developed the secret anti-oracle machine, invisible to the visions of anyone with prescience. After the fish speaker attack on Ix, the technology had leaked and by now, it was spreading across the entire Imperium. Malky admits to have created him with Noree inside a no room with his own cells, but created the exact opposite of him with them. After they end their conversation, Moneo kills Malky by dropping him off the Citadel Tower by order of the God Emperor. With him dead, the Ixians weren't a threat to humanity no more. Before Malky had arrived in Arrakis, Duncan, Siona, and Nayla had moved in to Tuono village. Being out there in the desert reminded Duncan of his old days among the Fremen. He noticed how bad their stillsuits were, and how the fish speakers made far too much noise while walking in the desert. Tuono was a disgusting, miserable place, reeking with the smell of garbage and sweat. A nabe called Garoon and his group of museum Fremen received the visitors. The nabe had no blue eyes, something every Fremen used to have. The children came and gave flowers to the visitors, and with them, Garoon told Duncan how the Fremen children are taught to beg for money, something that would have never happened back in the times of Dune. Idaho eventually rips off Garoon's coat out of anger and reveals that he is wearing a fake stillsuit. These miserable people aren't Fremen, they're wretches living under extreme poverty on the edge of a desert. He feels sorry for them and tells Garoon that he will share with the nabe everything he knows about real Fremen culture. Later, Idaho wakes up in his shared room with Siona at Tuono. He noticed she was reading some type of book. He thinks to himself about how much Stilgar would have despised this place called Tuono and the miserable people living there. Tayshar, a Fremen official of Garoon, comes and tells the duo about Leto's decision to marry at Tuono village instead of Tabur, and after he leaves, Siona shares with Idaho what she's been reading, Leto's journals, and with that, they start planning a way to get rid of the God Emperor. It was curious that Nayla was the only one with a lasgun, and she would most certainly obey Siona if she ordered her to use it against the God Emperor. The day comes. Leto's escort is leaving the citadel for its pilgrimage to Tuono by the high road of the Sareer's walls. It will take them 3 days to arrive at the village. Moneo feels it will be an unsafe journey, but Leto gives him no mind. Leto talks to Hui. He admits that he is worried about Moneo, but his seneschal has to free himself. Moneo is by now a very depressed character, not able to have any positive thoughts about the future. Leto tells Hui about how many people idealize pasts that have never existed. Leto and Hui admit how much they love each other, and he shares how he fears any new inventions by the Ixians, as he also once had shared it with Malky. Hui was the only person who realized how much love and faith in life Leto had. He lets a tear drop from his eye. It burns his skin, but Hui wipes it out. She touches his face. Noree was the first person to ever do that since he transformed. After the passage of 2 days, Leto and Hui are ready to arrive at Tuono. It will just take them 6 hours to get there. Moneo has been thinking of jumping off the edge of the wall, a tempting idea. He wanted ornithopters for security, but Leto prohibited those. The sight of Hui was enough to calm down and make Leto relax. The God Emperor knew that Moneo was afraid of a world without the God Emperor, but that was an incorrect notion. Moneo had to free himself of it for him to achieve his potential, but the Seneschal was far too old and entrenched into that notion. The escort resumed the pilgrimage. Now, they just had to cross the bridge over the Idaho River and they would arrive at Tuono. Idaho is climbing the walls of the Sareer with his bare hands. Apparently, he had a lot of experience on climbing walls and mountains because he did it a lot in his childhood. Garun had given him the location where to climb, the one the God Emperor and his escort would descend from with suspensors. While he's climbing, Siona, Nayla and a small group of museum fremen and fish speakers are with them. Duncan and Siona had convinced them to do a secret welcoming for the God Emperor. Nayla watches Idaho climb up and thinks to herself how much she would love to have his baby. Nayla wants Duncan all for herself, and once Duncan arrived at the top and dropped a rope for the rest of the group to climb, Nayla had an orgasm. Duncan wanted to get his revenge on all his past Gholas who had died under Leto's tyranny. He spots a bridge over the Idaho River. That would be the perfect location to get rid of the God Emperor. Once the escort arrives at the bridge, Nayla was hidden behind a rock, waiting for Leto to stand in the middle of the bridge. Siona had ordered her to use the lasgun and destroy the bridge. She believed it to be another test by God, and that Leto would perform a miracle and save everyone. Moneo was at the front of the court, Leto and Hui just behind, on his couch, hidden by its protective bubble. While Moneo was trying to understand why they were received by a group of dancing fish speakers and museum fremen, Nayla shot at the bridge and destroyed it as ordered. Nayla even shot Leto's couch suspensors. He would not be able to float away. The whole escort fell into the Idaho River. And while fallen, Moneo finally understood that, even without Leto, the golden path would prevail with Siona and her invisible offspring. Moneo finally understood the golden path and was finally free. Upon impact, both Moneo and Hui immediately died from the fall. Leto fell and was submerged by the river's waters. All that water was enough to make him explode sand trouts and melange everywhere, but his carcass was still alive. He managed to hold on to some rocks and was eventually washed to the side. Near a cave he crawled his way into. Siona, Idaho and Nayla ran their way up to him. Nayla was worried for Leto, who was now just a lump of torn apart flesh. Idaho picked her lasgun and killed her because she was responsible for Noree's death. Upon being slashed to pieces and burned by the lasgun, Nayla's crysknife fell to the ground and shattered completely. Thinking back to the scene, I think it is clear that her crysknife was Paul's crysknife, which also appeared during the Siaynoq Ritual. Leto saw Siona and called her Hamya, a female demon. He told Idaho to let the people of the Imperium to scatter all around the universe, for that was part of his golden path. Leto shared about the secret gigantic spice melange stash hidden in Siege Tabur, now known as Tabur Village. And then, the remnants of the God Emperor started disintegrating. Leto says that from all his Duncans, this one was his favorite and the only one whose actions he approved. He says that his fish speakers won't follow Siona, but they will most certainly follow Duncan. Siona's special genes make her invisible to the Oracle. All her descendants will inherit the same genetic trait, Siona's mark, and with that, they will be free of any tyrant that might ever come in the future. Before everything faded to black, Leto said, or believed that he said, how the Ixians weren't a threat to humanity anymore. Of that, he was sure. The last chapter has a secret extract by Hadi Benotto from their discovery at Dar-es-Balat. It describes how Siona had 9 daughters and Idaho had hundreds of sons with the fish speakers. The Bene Gesserit rose back to power of what is now known as the Old Imperium, and they changed Arrakis' name to Dune and then Arrakis, through their manipulation of the people still residing there. The discovery of Dar-es-Balat was kept a secret from the public. This extract mentions how the Ixian space travel machines were better than the Navigators Guild's methods. That technology spread throughout the Imperium and was even taken elsewhere along with the scattering. It is mentioned that the Tleilaxu managed to create artificial melange, now produced in massive quantities, but its quality was somewhat inferior to the authentic melange from Arrakis. It is noted how the true scale of the scattering is unknown. Nobody can say how much humans have spread throughout the undiscovered galaxy, and some of those people have arrived in places and planets nobody else will ever be able to. The Old Imperium was just a small fraction of humanity's expanse and total reach. Apparently, the eyes of Ebad's description changes in this book, like how in the next book, the description of the sandworms also changes. Previously, by the way those eyes were described, I imagined that the pupil turned to a darker tone of blue, while the sclera turned to a lighter blue, but by how Leto's eyes of Ebad and Duncan's memories of the Fremen describe them, it seems that now they are completely blue, of the same tonality all the way. I believe that Moneo's concept of God Emperor having a warm side and a lethal side is all in his imagination, as a way to cope with the God Emperor's burst of anger anytime Moneo behaved in an ignorant manner, as he often does in the novel. From my understanding, the Golden Path prevented the Ixians from creating some type of technology that would have brought humanity to extinction. With Leto II as Emperor, they instead developed no rooms, and thus stopped being the ultimate threat to humanity. Were it not for the God Emperor, humanity would have gone extinct by the time this story happens, and the Ixians would have been responsible for that. Starting in this book, we'll have not only the no-room technology, but also Siona's mark, thus making anyone with her ancestry invisible to the power of the Oracle. It's interesting to think about how, in the first book, Paul was the only person with this power, but now many people have its potential. And to break this mighty power, we have both genetics and machines to thank for. The fish speakers are quite interesting. It is mentioned in this book how having an army only of women can subdue men with sex and make them obedient. This idea will come back, as we will see in the next 2 books with the Honorable Mattress. Another thing I would like to point out is how, once Paul became emperor, he ended the feudalism of the Imperium, which had reigned for longer than 10,000 years. And 3,000 years later, with Leto II as God Emperor, the Atreides also managed to end the technological stagnation of the Imperium, imposed ever since the Butlerian Jihad. This idea will be explored further in the next books, but humanity lived far too long under stagnation, and with the collapse of the God Emperor, we will see that the factions around the universe will defy not only the limitations of the Butlerian Jihad, but also turn the Great Convention irrelevant. People will start using nuclear weapons and destroying and burning planets from the surface, which was previously prohibited. Now, I don't think Frank was leading the story toward a thinking machine ultimate threat. If you think that, then you totally misunderstood Dune. But maybe we could have seen robots and AI as some sort of side group in Dune 7. Who knows? We had 6 books and humanity was always responsible for its own issues. And even back in the Butlerian Jihad, it was humans using machines to control other humans. I haven't read Brian's fanfics yet, but I intend on doing so. Since I'm Brazilian, I'll be reading the Aleph editions for Dune in Portuguese. But as for now, only Sisterhood of Dune has been released. So it will take us a while until I can make a video on every single Brian Herbert Dune novel. I would, yes, like to read all of his works, although from what I've read about them, they seem to really be as bad as people say they are. This was the full story of God Emperor of Dune. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and leaving a like. Write a comment down below on your thoughts about God Emperor. Maybe share your own theories. This whole video was mostly my perspective and interpretation of the novel, and that's the magic of reading books. They're open to interpretation. I hope you had a nice time. Until the next video.